Hello YouTube, Dave here again. I thought it was a bit past time to do another viewer question. So I've had a few different questions, of course, asked of me in the past. Some things about my channel, some things about my D&D collection, D&D preferences, things of that nature. And I always enjoy answering these questions. So a while back I had done a video about some of the more disappointing items in my collection. And I wanted to answer a question that was asked about those items or just about what I would do with my collection in general. So there's a couple of different questions that I want to group together into just one video. So the first question was based off the fact that I have items in my collection that I view as disappointing and things that I would caution other people against buying. Would I be willing to sell those items, or would I be willing to sell items from my collection in general? So to answer that question first, it's not the easiest thing in the world to answer. Generally speaking, I want to say that no, I have no intentions of ever selling any of the items that are in my collection, even the ones that I don't personally think were good purchases with the benefit of hindsight, or even immediately at the time. Like the Miniatures Handbook, for example, for 3.5, as disappointed as I was immediately after I bought that book, it's still something that I want in my collection because I spent the money on it, I own it, and I can always, use it as a way of educating people about some of the books from earlier editions to avoid, or, things along those lines. Now, I have actually, that said, I have actually sold a few books from my collection in the past. And those were, generally speaking, just books that I had duplicates of. These were... Actually, some of them I even ended up giving away. For example, I had 2 copies of the 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons DMG, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and one of which was the actual first book that I ever had in my D&D collection, which was given to me by somebody else, which, long story short, I didn't know him that well, so I thought that when he gave me the book that it was his to give. Turns out that it wasn't, but so much time had passed that I just had no way of giving it back to the original owner. And I think at that point the original owner just really wasn't concerned about it. The book was kind of beat up, and my understanding was that they had another copy, but anyway. So I ended up giving that copy to a friend of mine who was interested in the 2nd edition AD&D guidelines for creating new races and classes, which was in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I just basically gave him that book because I had acquired a much better conditioned copy later on. So I ended up giving that to him. I've also sold one of my 3.5 Player's Handbooks. I had 2 originally that I had bought when 3.5 had first come out, one of which had a little bit of damage on the front cover. So that was my player's version that anybody who needed it that didn't have their own copy would be able to flip through and use. And then I had my DM's copy, which is something that never traveled. I always kept it at home because I ran most of my games at home anyway. But that was one that only I was going to ever touch and use. Since then, I've kind of done that with pretty much every edition that's come since. So I have 2 copies now of a 2nd edition AD&D Player's Handbook, 3.0, 3.5. I have 2 copies of the 4th edition Player's Handbook, as well as currently 3 copies of the 5th edition Player's Handbook. So when I ended up buying a 3rd copy of the 3.5 Player's Handbook, which was the reprinted versions that were done in 2012, I believe, I didn't need 3 copies of the Player's Handbook. I had a friend who was really interested in Dungeons & Dragons and was interested in continuing to play 3.5 D&D. This is when I was kind of looking to get away from it anyway, because I had run 3rd edition or 3.5 for I think 12 years at this point, because this came out in 2012. So I ended up selling him my player's copy of the Player's Handbook for, I think it was like $10 or something like that. I also had bought the reprinted copy of the Monster Manual for 3.5 because I wanted to get all 3 of them as a set. So I had a friend who was looking to run Pathfinder but didn't want to buy the Bestiary. Since Pathfinder is pretty much the same as 3.5 D&D with just a couple of differences, he asked if I was willing to sell my 2nd copy of the Monster Manual, which I agreed to, and I sold it to him again for I think like $5 or $10. It wasn't a whole lot of money. So I ended up giving him my original copy of the 3.5 Monster Manual. I still have a copy of the 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide, which if anybody was really ever interested in it, I would probably part with, because I don't need two of those. But other than that, there's nothing in my collection that I would consider selling at this point in time, with the possible exception of one of my copies of the 5th edition Player's Handbook. But I don't see that necessarily happening. Most of the players in my games have a copy of the Player's Handbook. I do have one group that consists of mainly new players, so I keep the extra one around for them. If one of them asked to buy it, then I would consider it. But that's the only way that I would end up selling, is if I had multiples of, and I didn't want to necessarily keep all of them. I also have duplicates of the 5th edition starter set, as well as the 5th edition D&D character sheets, and those are things that I'm never going to part with, because number one, the second set are both sealed, and there's kind of a story or reason behind me having each of these items. For the starter set, for example, around Christmas time last year, Chapters had a promotion going on where they have a point reward system, and when you earn so many points, you can redeem them for $5 off your purchase, $10 off, and then it goes to like 20, 40, and 80, or so on and so forth. I had $5 worth of points already on my account, but they bumped me up to the next level, which was $10. Their copy of the starter set was selling for $14 online after their online discount. So for basically $5 after tax, I got a sealed copy of the 5th edition starter set. And that's basically like 20 some odd dollars off the cover price here in Canada. So to me, that's always just kind of a story that, I ended up getting this really awesome deal, and that's why I have it. When it comes to the character sheets, it's a little bit of a different situation. With the character sheets, the reason that I have a sealed copy was, the sealed copy is actually the copy that I got from the store where I originally had ordered the sheets in from. The distributor that store deals with was kind of being extremely difficult, and the sheets were several days, or I think even a couple of weeks late coming in. And I really wanted to get a video out on these character sheets before YouTube was flooded with people doing reviews of them. I try to get these out as quickly as I can, so after waiting, I think it was a week or two after the release of the sheets, or when they said they were supposed to get them, there's another store nearby where I live that I called. They had one copy left, so I got them to set that aside. I had to hop on a bus and go to like the other side of the city, pick these sheets up, came home, did my review for them. I think it was like 2 days later. The original store that I had ordered them from got their copies in. I had a certain amount of store credit built up with them, and I didn't want to cancel my order, so basically, I had picked those up afterwards, and I'm going to keep those sealed. Just because it was such a frustrating experience trying to get those sheets, it's, again, sort of a story to tell. So that's sort of the basics of would I ever sell my collection off. Which brings me to the next question that I was asked, which again relates to my plans for my collection of D&D books. And that is basically what I ever plan to do with them in the future. For example, do I ever see a point where I no longer want to own these and would sell them off as a basically a big lot collection? Or, for example, when the worst happens, if I were to pass away, what do I want done with my books? So the thing for that is, really at this point in time, I never see a situation where I don't want to have these in my possession. I love my collection of D&D books. It's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I've spent a long time building up to where it is. It's not the world's greatest collection by any means, but I consider it to be a very impressive collection based off the fact that for most of my life, I've been working jobs that are very close to, if not minimum wage. So the fact that I've been able to amass the items that I have in my collection off of very limited funds while still supporting myself and maintaining a place to live and feeding myself or my family, I consider that to be a huge success. So I never see a point where I ever want to give these away. Even if I were to move into a retirement home, my bookshelf would be coming with me. Now, as for what happens when I pass, at this point, I'm hoping to start teaching my nephew to play Dungeons and Dragons. Mainly because he's expressed an interest in it in the past. He just recently, this year, turned 11. So he's at the point now where I think he can start to handle the rules of the game, as well as sort of the more potentially mature things that happen in the game, like, you know, combat, fighting, creature death, and stuff along those lines. So I want to start teaching him how to play the game, and my goal is that hopefully he'll become as fascinated by it and become as big a fan of the Dungeons & Dragons game that I can pass my collection of D&D books on to him when I pass. If worse comes to worse, then, you know, I'd like to try to find some sort of, I don't really want to give it to like a gaming store and have it sold off bit by bit. You know, maybe have it sold as a lot for a serious collector, or even try to donate it to some sort of group that would actually put use to these books and use them for, you know, like youth programs or things along those lines. But that's something that I'm hoping won't come up for a very long time. So those are just basically some questions about my collection and, you know, my plans for it for the future. You know, let me know in the comments below. How do you guys feel about your D&D book collection? You know, do you sell books off? Do you feel like wanting to hold on to everything? Or, you know, for example, if you've had a bunch of 3.5 books and you moved on to 5th, you never want to go back to 3.5, you know, do you sell your books off, or do you keep them as something on your shelf? So let me know in the comments basically, you know, what you guys like to do with your collections, you know, in terms of selling them off, keeping them, or your plans for what happens to your collection, you know, when the worst happens and you end up passing. So let me know in the comments below. I look forward to reading them. If you have any other questions that you'd like me to answer in video, please don't hesitate to ask. And I'll do my best to get through as many of them as I can. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.